my beloved friends, you are the bearers of the name of God in this day. You have been chosen as the repositories of His mystery. It behooves each one of you to manifest the attributes of God and to exemplify by your deeds and words the signs of His righteousness, His power and glory. The very members of your body must bear witness to the loftiness of your purpose, the integrity of your life, the reality of your faith, and the exalted character of your devotion. For verily I say, this is the day spoken of by God in His book. On that day will we set a seal upon their mouths, yet shall their hands speak unto us, and their feet shall bear witness to that which they shall have done. The Bob.
So today we're happy to have Dr. James Keene, and he'll be talking about the Bab's first and last disciples, Mullah Hussein and Quddus. Dr. James Keene is a scientist with publications of original research in neuroscience, behavioral science, and computer science in peer-reviewed journals. He's also an essay, screenplay, and novel author. Dr. Keene holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago in Human Development, Behavioral Sciences, as well as a PhD from the University of Michigan in Physiology and Biophysics, Neurophysiology. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Keene.
When the disintegrating old world order blocks a clear view of the international Baha'i community shown behind here, we need to move to one side or the other for a better view or perspective of the new. We have that God delivers teachings for human progress in each era. And so we have the great religions founded by Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, then more recently, because today, and finally, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the Baha'i Faith, featuring world unity based on justice. Now, the Babi movement, or Babi religion, was a transition between the age of prophecy, Muhammad known as the seal of the prophets, to the age of fulfillment, which Baha'is believe is today. Now, just a quick note on terminology. The word mullah in Islam refers to the clergy that they had there in that time in the 1840s and for long below. Now, what happens if I click here? Okay, next one is letters of the living. Interesting, because letters is a communication to whom? Or from whom? The living. And we're going to focus today on the first letter of the living, Mullah Hussein, known as the Gate of the Gate, and the last one, Quddus, which means the most holy of these disciples of the Bab. Oh, good, the arrow key is working. I was probably asked to speak on this subject, Quddus and Mullah Hussein, because of some Baha'i theme books in the Baha'i Themes book series, particularly the Dawnbreakers movie and the novel. The Dawnbreakers movie is an epic adventure thriller, which contains a screenplay and supporting documents. Interestingly, sometimes the movie is based upon a novel. In this case, the novel was written after the movie. It is a true story of the Baha'i movement in Persia leading to the founding of the Baha'i Faith, based upon the original screenplay in the Dawnbreakers. Now, in the movie script, just for reference, the names of leading characters are shown in all capitals in brackets. For example, Hussein, Mullah, Hussein's brother and nephew, Aiz, who was a secretary to the Bab, Ali, a cousin and brother-in-law of Tahira, Hadi, Tahira, and Quddus. Some brief description, sometimes, well, the first question is, well, what is the story about? So that we might have very brief descriptions because we don't know whether someone is really interested or not. For example, an American missionary in Iran clings to the hope that Christ will return on a cloud as the true story of a real life prophet unfolds. The remarkable true story of a real life prophet in Iran. Iranians believe a prophet martyred 1,000 years ago will return to claim all authority again. Here we have sort of a bombshell type of situation. While the European powers jockey for position in Iran, the revolutionary spirit of a young visionary throws the corrupt empire into turmoil. Why might the general public be interested in the Bahá'í story? Well, the Ayatollahs in Persia at that time and Iran today have known about this story all along. Their hopes that Americans will never learn the truth have been dashed forever. Or we might say the ultimate hero faces the ultimate depravity in Iran. Who else could it be but a modern day prophet? Where else in Iran? Now, since we're limited in time, when the video comes out, you can pause it if you want to read some of these slides in more detail. Now, if a person is interested in this story more than just a one-line description, here we have a one-paragraph description to get into even more detail, which again, I'll leave for you to pause the video if you want to read this in more detail. Now, the Bahá'í story chronology. Back in the 1980s, when the movie script was written, in order to write a script, it helps to know the story being told. Although there are a number of books recounting the general story of the Bahá'ís, it became clear that nobody had actually written a comprehensive chronology. Existing literature that focused on various episodes without clear description of the exact sequence of events. For example, if a person appears in several events, one might ask which event occurred and what is the time interval between the events and how the person traveled between different event locations. In short, before a script could be written, the goal of historical accuracy required a chronology of events compiled from historical sources, which appears in the Dawnbreakers movie book. We can further break down the story into some 32 chapters as in the novel version of the movie script. And it begins with the anticipation of the mission of the Bab, the shaky movement in Karbala. We start with the expectations of the return of the prophet, with the arrival of American missionary Austin Wright, yes, he actually existed, in Haifa, Palestine, on his way to the Christian mission in Urmia, Persia. This is an early image of what Haifa might have looked like at that time. And up Mount Carmel, you see the tents of various tribesmen on their way carrying merchandise, probably from one place to another in the boat in the harbor. One of the astounding events concerning the mission of the Bab at that time in 1843 was the Great Comet of 1843. Now here's a map of Persia, which is called Iran today. We start out in Karbala with the shaky movement. Notice that the Bab was in Shiraz and moved his way as the story progresses on up north toward the capital city of Tehran. Syed Kazim headed the Shakis who expected the promised Qaim. And he dies on the last day of 1843. His followers began to search for this promised one, and many later became disciples of the Bab. The first was Mullah Hussein in Shiraz in 1844, early 1844, and the last of the Letters of the Living was Qudus. Mullah Hussein spoke to a large group in his lectures in Shiraz. Many of the original 18 disciples of the Bab were also followers of the shaky movement in Karbala. This is the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala, an old image of it, the way it would look back in those days. Now, on his way to Tehran, Mullah Hussein taught the message of the Bab in Isfahan. It turns out that Mullah Hussein was apparently a very effective speaker. And one could go to the mosque, and of course, the mullah part of Mullah Hussein's name designation here means that he was a religious scholar, okay? Now, Mansur Khan, the governor of Isfahan, refused to collaborate with mullahs desiring to refute and suppress Mullah Hussein's activity in Isfahan on his way to Tehran. Here, all sketches in this format are from the movie pre-production work. Here at this time, we had Muhammad Shah was the, I guess you might say, the monarch or secular leader of Persia, which is a vast area. And here is his sort of rat-faced prime minister who did most of the dirty work in this story. Mullah Hussein met with Prime Minister Casey, who never delivered the writing of the text from the Bab to Muhammad Shah in Tehran in the summer of 1844, a few short months after the declaration of the Bab to his followers in Shiraz. Mullah Hussein also delivered a text from the Bab to Baha'u'llah, showing that at this point in time, very early on, the Bab knew of Baha'u'llah and the founder of the Bahá'í Faith, and was communicating with him through, in this case, Mullah Hussein. The Bab, Qudus, and an Ethiopian servant, excuse me, then traveled on pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, and the Bab proclaimed his mission to the Sharif of Mecca, delivered by Qudus. Farrant, the British charge of affairs at that time, becomes the secretary of the British legation in Tehran. Some of these events are important because Persia at that time, and perhaps a little bit even still today, was a very international place. I mean, it was on the Silk Road trade route from the Far East to Europe. There were Austrians, French, British, Russians all over the place, including merchants and the diplomatic corps and so forth. Sheikh Hassan travels from Karbala, which was where the Sheikhi movement was headquartered in Ottoman territory, as I showed on the map, to Shiraz, and upon arriving, he becomes the secretary of the Bab, transcribing tablets, etc. When the Bab returns to Shiraz in the middle of 1845. Meanwhile, in Qazvin, which is to the west of the capital, Tahir's family opposes her new allegiance to the Bab. This was the only woman disciple of the Bab at that time, among the first letters of the living. I should qualify that because there were other women, of course, much later on. Meanwhile, in Karbala, Sayyid Kazem's widow dies. Tahira moves to the residence, another residence, and continues teaching the new message of the Bab, which created quite a stir there. The Bab arrives in Bushir in southern Iran on the Persian Gulf. He had sent Qudus forward with another tablet to Muhammad Shah. Well, the Bab sent another tablet to Muhammad Shah, which he never received because the prime minister blocked it, and sends Qudus ahead to Shiraz. Qudus was welcomed by the Bab's uncle, who, after the original 18 disciples, was the first to embrace the cause of the Bab in Shiraz. Now imagine that the Bab was a shopkeeper in Shiraz, working with his uncle and others in the trading business, okay? So imagine, for example, the young nephew of a McDonald's franchise in your area suddenly declares that he's a prophet and develops disciples. What would happen? This is a fascinating story. Next, Qudus meets Mullah Sadiq in Shiraz. They proclaimed words prescribed by the Bab at the new mosque shown to the left, and the town was seized in dismay and consternation. Excuse me. Hussein Khan obtained a copy of the Surah of Joseph revealed by the Bab. This is a surah about a chapter in the Quran. Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, located in Shiraz, intervened, ordering the arrest of Qudus, Mullah Sadiq, and Mullah Ali Akbar. Their beards were burned, their noses pierced, and a cord inserted by which they were led through the streets. They were first to be persecuted on Persian soil. Actually, the persecution was much worse than what I just said. But this is a family venue, so we'll try to keep it not too depressing. People of Shiraz are wild with excitement at this time. Imagine, the governor, Hussein Khan, sends 12 horsemen to intercept the Bab's party on the road to Shiraz. We might divide these 32 chapters up into the next section where the state reacts to the Babi message. In July of the next year, the Bab rides into Shiraz under arrest with the escort, was rebuked and struck by the governor's assistant. The Bab was ordered by the governor to address the congregation at the mosque, at mosque to clarify his position. The Bab was placed under house arrest. The Bab writes followers in Karbala to go to Isfahan and wait for instructions there. Now you notice that the Bab is displaying an incredible amount of logistics ability. At every step in this story, just keep in mind, he is directing virtually everything that's happened. Report on the Bab was written from Bushire to London's The Times, and the report appeared in the Times newspaper. London Times reports on a Mohammedan schism from reports of the British merchant in Shiraz. You see, the foreigners were all over the place in Persia. French, Austrians, Germans, Russians, and so forth. Not only the diplomatic corps, there were a lot of merchants and traders as well. Now, at this time, Bailey's comet appears to crown an unusual year of over 300 comets, leading to a remarkable astronomical observation. A Professor Chalice, viewing Bailey's comet through a telescope in Cambridge, found that it is split into twin comets. Sometimes Baha'is relate this event to the fact that we had twin prophets or twin messengers of God, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, in this era, which is the dawn of the modern era. It's a major transition in human history, not just in religion, okay? By the way, even if you're not too interested in religion as such, remember, you will agree with me, I hope, that religion has been a major phenomena in human history, a very important phenomenon. Now, the Syed Yahya, known as Vahid, a suave, urbane scholar, was sent to investigate the episode of the Bab by the Shah. From Isfahan, Mullah Hussein, with only his brother and nephew, goes to Shiraz. Later, other Babis in Isfahan arrive in Shiraz. Hussein Khan, the governor, uses secret agents to obtain information regarding the character and influence of the Babi movement. Muhammad Shah sends Vahid from Tehran to Shiraz to investigate the claims of the Bab. Vahid was a guest of Hussein Khan, the governor. Excuse me again. But after 3 interviews with the Bab, Vahid becomes a follower. This is amazing. It's sort of like the most erudite scholar in the US was sent to investigate the claims of the young nephew of our McDonald's franchise somewhere in the US or wherever. Following protests in Shiraz, Mullah Hussein leaves for Khorasan. Again, Mullah Hussein in Shiraz is giving speeches in the various mosques in the area and attracting huge crowds. Also, the Bab would leave his residence and go to various mosques and be surrounded by crowds of admirers. Other Babis leave Shiraz. Mullah Abdul Karim remains transcribing writings of the Bab. Syed Hussein of Yazd, called Eyes in the movie script, transcribed writings of the Bab. Here he's shown at the Russian embassy where he's been, where they try to disgrace him, moving his headgear at the Russian consul of Anichkov in Tabriz toward the end of the story. The Bab bequeaths property to his wife and mother. He transfers residence to his uncle's house nearby and sends Mullah Abdul Karim, Syed Hussein, and Syed Hassan and Hussein to Isfahan. These three were secretaries to the Bab. So in other words, the Bab was anticipating something not so good was going to happen. The Bab bequeathing his property to his wife and mother. The governor, Hussein Khan, protested Muhammad Shah regarding Vahid's behavior. The Shah said to his prime minister, "We have been lately informed that Syed Yahya has become a Babi. If this is true, it behooves us to cease belittling the cause of this Syed." Now, the Shah, of course, was the monarch and one of the, you might say, the secular power of Persia at the time, but had to was shown here in this quote to perhaps be possibly somewhat open-minded about the Bab. Now, the Shah, Prime Minister Akazi in Tehran orders the Fars governor at Shiraz, Hussein Khan, through his constable and helper, a French agent known as Ferrier, to kill the Bab and arrest him and put an end to the whole matter. As it happened, here's a narrow Shiraz street and what it might have looked like at the time, and a cholera outbreak occurs at the same time they were trying to conduct the Bab to his execution. The governor had to flee the city and the Bab was allowed to leave the city and move on to Isfahan, where he disappears. Manager, the governor of Isfahan, conducts a scheme to feign exit of the Bab from Isfahan when the Shah, through Prime Minister Kazi, ordered the Bab to Tehran, but then secretly returns the Bab to safety in his private house in Isfahan. The Bab then becomes an honored guest for 4 months at secret apartments, while rumors circulate on the fate of the Bab. Following manager's death, his nephew sends a messenger to Tehran to inform Muhammad Shah that his late uncle had not sent the Bab to Tehran as previously thought. Manager Khan was one of the richest persons in all of Persia at that time. Now here's a panorama view of the Tehran with Mount Damavand in the background, this huge mountain. This looks like a small place, but actually this is a very huge place where various drill fields and mosques were occupied huge areas. The Bab writes to Muhammad Shah to ask for a meeting as he's being escorted toward Tehran. However, the prime minister was to prevent a direct meeting between the Bab and the Shah by imprisoning the Bab in Maku. So here we get to the next section where the Babis are acting in response to this persecution by the government. Mullah Hussein walks from Mashhad to Maku. Now here he's leaving in September of 1847 and arriving in March 1848. In other words, he's walking through the winter. This is over 900 miles as the bird flies, and a lot of these trails, particularly up here in the Northwest, are winding roads because it's a hilly, very mountainous area. Upon leaving Mashhad over here, Mullah Hussein was offered a number of horsemen to accompany him and various assets and so forth, but he refused them all, vowing to walk all the way to meet his master in the prison fortress of Maku. Here is a view of the ruins of the prison fortress, and Sadiq, the crusty old reformer, who started out in Karbala in the Holy City in the Ottoman Turkish area that I showed you, and came to Shiraz, was persecuted there, as we mentioned, and made his way all the way up to West Persia. And it was estimated that he had converted or recruited some 30,000 Babis just in that area alone, our crusty old reformer. A depiction of Dolgorukov, the Russian envoy. Fearing disturbances, Dolgorukov protests to Prime Minister Casey concerning the proximity of the Bab and so many of his followers to Russian territory. They were fearing disturbances. Muhammad Shah orders the transfer of the Bab to Sharik, now in Tabriz. Mullah Hussein learns of the Bab's transfer to Sharik. Mullah Hussein reaches Barfaroush, meets Qudus there, also known as the Hidden Treasure, and the Babis there, and addresses the leading religious authority, which we will refer to in a moment as the Sayyid al-Ulama. This is a religious authority that was well schooled in Islamic law, ulama, of Barfaroush, which is today known as Babel, B-A-B-O-L, and continues to Mashhad in Kurdistan. In Kurdistan, a Babi center was established. The Bab leaves Maku and is incarcerated in Sharik at this time, the Grievous Mountain. The Bab writes to his followers to assemble in Kurdistan. Again, you see the Bab is, well, you might say a logistics expert and is orchestrating this whole story. Of course, Baha'is believe that the Bab was guided by God. The northwest province of where the city of Mashhad is located. After Mullah Hussein arrived in Mashhad, a new property was purchased and a new Babi center was constructed, shown above. Somewhat later, Qudus leaves Barfaroush to join Mullah Hussein and the Babis in Mashhad. So our two leading characters here are in Mashhad. Qudus leaves Mashhad for Badash. The conference of Badash, lasting 3 weeks of 81 Babis, featured Qudus, Tahira, and Baha'u'llah. Purpose was to break with the past and consider means to free the Bab. Here, Tahira became known as Tahira, the Pure One, a title approved by the Bab, and Muhammad al-Barfaroushi, the Barfaroushi part of these names just means that's the town he was born in and raised in. He became known as Qudus the Most Holy. Muhammad Shah's illness worsens. The presence of the Bab created a fervor in the population of Tabriz, where he was brought to be interrogated and examined as ordered by the 17-year-old Prince Nasruddin, who later became Shah. And of course, in the mid-time in that year, pretty much coincident with the conference of Badash, the Bab's trial and interrogation took place, and the Bab publicly claims to be the promised one to 100 assembled clerics. So here we have, I'm just showing this to show that the Christian missionary is following this, Austin Wright is following the story all along. And he's in very close proximity to Sharik, where the Christian mission in Urumaya is located, and Sharik, the prison fortress. And the Bab was taken south of this lake here to Tabriz, I think. And so Austin Wright is always part of this story. Mullah Hussein and nearly 300 Babis finally reach Mazandaran. As they leave Mashhad and go to the west toward Mazandaran, which is just north of the capital Tabriz, more and more, each village they pass, more Babis joined them. Under house arrest in Sari, near Babul, Qudus receives a message from Mullah Hussein. At that time, these messages exchanged between Qudus and Mullah Hussein, it was clear that they knew ahead of time that death was going to visit them, their own martyrdoms. And yet they continued. The physician in September, at about the same time as all this is going on, by the way, Mullah Hussein had predicted the death of Muhammad Shah. And the physician at the British mission was called to the palace of by the Shah's physician. And Muhammad Shah 40 had suffered from the gout for 10 years and he dies. And the Prince Nasruddin, located in Tabriz, is called from Tabriz to assume the crown in Tehran. Baha'u'llah was conducted to Tehran under arrest just as news of the Shah's death reached Nur. Mullah, here's a sketch of the wicked Said-ul-Ulama that Mullah Hussein had encountered in his prior visit to that area before arriving again in the Barfarouche area. On the morning of October 10 in 1948, the townspeople, urged by this leading divine, attacked the Babis led by Mullah Hussein outside Barfarouche. And here we have the tree soldier musket cutting incident. Apparently a soldier was behind a small tree and had his musket positioned vertically, and Mullah Hussein came on a horse and cut the three items into 6 pieces. And in that morning, Mullah Hussein and the Babis attempt to leave Barfarouche, but then the Babis were attacked in the forest by government troops, supposedly escorting them to safety. You see, the religious leaders were always inciting the government people, the princes and governors of the various provinces, to attack the Babis, and that's what happened here. Now, Mullah Hussein and companions entered the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi, and Muhammad Bakr, who I showed in a previous slide, a sketch of him anyway, designs a fort. And finally, Nasruddin Shah, 17, arrives in Tehran from Tabriz. Mirza Taqi Khan, the new prime minister, and in Shiraz, forwarding revenue to the capital to gain favor of the new Shah, Hussein Khan goes into personal debt and is unable to pay his troops. People of Shiraz rebel, forcing dismissal of Governor Hussein Khan. So he got his karma, as it were. Mirza Taqi Khan, the new prime minister, ignores Hussein Khan's problem and appoints a new governor. So here we now have a new Shah, the boy Shah, Nasruddin Shah, and his prime minister, Mirza Taqi Khan. Here's Tabarsi Fort number 1, was completed from when the fort was completed. Baha'u'llah is said to have visited Qudus, arrives from Sari, and now becomes the leader of the Babis at the fort. The prince surrounds the fort with 2,000 men and cuts off water and supplies to the fort. Baha'u'llah and companions leave Nur to attempt to join the defenders at Tabarsi, but government troops do not permit their passage. Meanwhile, there's heavy rain and followed by a snow. Here's the leader of the besiegers of the Babi, Mustafa Khan, and the prince and 400 soldiers were apparently killed, and the rest scattered, 100 horses captured when the Babis went on a raid. Mustafa Khan reports defeat to the Shah. The Shah ordered the new governor of Mazandaran and the general, chief of Mul, Abbas Quli Khan, to attack the Babis, to erase them from the pages of history. Now, I'm going to skip over some detail here, which you can pause if you want when the video appears. Needless to say, the Babis were vastly outnumbered and were attacked continuously by the forces of both the monarchy and the prompted by the Islamic authorities at the time. Here's some drawings of the fort, the way it was at the time. Abbas Quli Khan moves the Shah's army through Barfaroush to Tabarsi and erects barricades around the fort and again cuts water and supplies to the fort. In January 1949, a Dolgorukov dispatch notes Bob's prophetic claim. I mention this here because, again, the almost instant transmission of information about the Bob's declaration of his prophecy and these events in Iran, the Babi movement, as it's known, became known internationally, as it were. Regarding Hussein Khan in Shiraz, Farrant reported that the troops have made him a prisoner, demanding their arrears of pay. Now, the work, I'll skip over some events here to the fact that in early February, Mul Hussein at 36 was killed in battle in Mazandaran. Apparently some 200 Babis remain. Suffering another defeat, Abbas Quli Khan learned of the death of Mul Hussein, who by then was a name known by virtually everybody in Persia, Mullah Hussein. And the troops feared him because they thought that they could not ever defeat him or that he could not die and so forth. So that the news of his death was maintained secret, and Abbas Quli Khan expected an early victory because of this. A Dolgorukov dispatch notes that the state of Mazandaran has become serious. Here he's reporting, I guess, to St. Petersburg in Russia. Details of defeat suffered by the governors there. Dolgorukov again notes that Babi's numbers are increasing in Tehran and Azerbaijan. Abbas Quli Khan forced to obey the Shah's order, engaged in combat. In Nur, Tahira received news of Mullah Hussein's death. Now, one thing about making a chronology is a lot of events that are not reported in any of the history books become possible. For example, Mullah Hussein and Tahira could have met in Kazvin on Mullah Hussein's walk from Mashhad all the way to the northwest of Persia to meet the Bab in Maku. This is just one example of events that probably happened because the main leaders would probably not be in the same vicinity without meeting or communicating in some manner at that time. Dolgorukov reports Mizrahi Khan estimates 100,000 Babis. Now that's quite a group for just a few years, and it's beginning to worry him very much. 800 Babis in Zanjan threatened to disrupt public order. In March of that year, the army was finally reorganized after the defeat. But the Babis keep fighting on, and I'll skip over some of the details here in the interest of time. The prince offers a truce written on the Quran to Babis at Tabarsi. Now, the fact that he had to offer a truce meant that he couldn't defeat them. Think about that. Written on the Quran means it's a very sacred truce offer, something to really be honored. The Babis accept this offer, but are then betrayed. The siege in Mazandaran ends with the massacre of the remaining Babis in the prince's camp and in the nearby forest. These included 9 of the first disciples. The prince, accompanied by Qudus, go to Barfaroush because Qudus was the leader at that time and was considered to be quite a prize. And the governor and the Saida Ulema were negotiating with each other as to who would get to kill him. He was so important because they wanted to have the glory in their mind of killing him. And he was martyred at just the age of 27 in Barfaroush and shown in the skept, again humiliated without any headgear. at that time. A French periodical refers to the Parsi struggle, probably reported by the Shah's physician. Okay, so this ends our story of Mullah Hussein and Qudus. What happened next? The Babi numbers increased throughout Persia, turmoil and death in the capital. The Babi siege, the siege of the Babis in Zanjan, and finally the martyrdom of the Bab, where he was shot by 750 troops in Tabriz. So what ideas can we get from this story? Quickly, martyrdom, suffering endured for a cause of Mullah Hussein, Qudus, hundreds of other Babis at Tabarsi, and many thousands throughout Persia ended with their deaths. Some synonyms are persecution, devotion, sacrifice, affliction, torment, ordeal, torture, pain. This level of commitment to a cause is very difficult to describe adequately with just verbal definitions. Hence, telling and showing the story may best effectively convey its many lessons to the general public. Within a very short time, the Babi message and presence spread over vast distances. Within a year, in 1844, authorities and notables in Tehran were aware of the Babi movement. Soon thereafter, newspapers and governments in Europe featured news of the Babis and their persecution by Islamic authorities. Other ideas, both the very young and old, may trigger major historical events. The extensive travels of Babis effectively spread their message. Travel teaching was born in the Babi movement, you might say. Secular or clerical powers often do not merit trust. The Babis offered peaceful solutions and showed good faith in accepting offers from the powers that be, but the Babis were betrayed at every instance. What are the similarities, to conclude now, what are the similarities and differences between the culture and society of 1840s Persia and other locations today, the US, Europe, wherever? Example, given present conditions in today's world, how might Baha'is prepare for adversities such as stockpiling, survival supplies, or things like that? Another example, when and how might self-defense be appropriate in today's world at the various locations on this earth? I'll close with some more sketches of other characters in the movie and wait for our host to chime in. Sorry if I took too long here.
Thank you so much. That was really comprehensive, and a lot of it, the images I'd never seen before. So thank you so much. So if we have questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. We already have a few questions. We know that Qudus had a very special position among the letters of the living. In your view, did Tahira have that same position?
Gee, I don't know how to answer that. Both were among the letters of the living, the 18 first disciples of the Bab, and certainly the titles that they had, the pure one for Tahira and the most holy for Qudus, is very, very important. The gate of the gate was the title for Mullah Hussein. I don't know how to rank them one above the other. And I'm sure others who are wiser than me might know how to rank them, but I don't think the point is to rank them. Each had a different role and did quite different things in this whole story.
Thank you. Could you explain how exactly Mullah Hussein al-Qudus heard about the promised one and recognized him?
How they heard about what?
The promised one, the Bab.
Oh, they both Qudus and Mullah Hussein were participants in the Shaikhi movement in Karbala. Also, the Bab traveled from Shiraz to Karbala, and there are some indications that even before Sayyid Kazim died, he directed some special attention to the Bab. Now, most of the first 18 disciples of the Bab had been also in Karbala, but they finally found the Bab as the promised Keene all the way over in Shiraz. And remember, in those days, that was some rough traveling. It took months for them to get from one place to another.
I guess I'll ask a follow-up question. Could you explain how Mullah Hussein was looking for certain characteristics in the Promised One, and that kind of that conversation that happened between him and the Bab, where the Bab started, sharing things about himself that matched those criteria?
Well, Mullah Hussein encountered the Bab. Well, we can place the Bab and Mullah Hussein in the same place in Karbala, as participants in meetings held by Sayyid Kazim of the Shaikhi movement. Whether those two actually met at that time or had any conversation or whatever is certainly not known, at least to me. It took months later when Mullah Hussein traveled to Shiraz, found the Bab, and the Bab revealed to him the Surah of Joseph, which is a commentary on a chapter of the Quran. Apparently, I'm not sure of this, so others might correct me, but apparently Mullah Hussein had questions about this surah and its meaning, and the Bab met his expectations, and therefore Mullah Hussein accepted the Bab right off the bat as the first believer in the Promised One.
Thank you. Could you explain some of the mystery of the station of Qudus, how he was a descendant of Muhammad, and then he had a lot of attachment to the Bab? Could you explain kind of the mystery of his station?
Muhammad Ali Barfarushi, I don't recall seeing that title of Sayyid in association with his name. However, for some reason, the Bab selected him to accompany him from Shiraz on his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. And so he became a very close associate with the Bab and very much trusted by the Bab. And as we saw when he arrived in Tabarsi, he became the leader of the Babis, and the older Mullah Hussein replaced, accepted his leadership. And the Bab designated his title as most holy, and Qudus participated with Tahira and Janabi Baha, as Baha'u'llah was known at that time, in the conference of Badash, where Tahira proclaimed the end of an era and the unveiling of women and their equal rights and so forth, and their emancipation. So that answer reflects the fact that I don't have a lot of more detailed knowledge about that, I'm afraid to say.
Thank you. And you've written a screenplay, The Dawnbreakers, correct?
Yes, that was in the 1980s.
Okay, and that's available on Bahá'íLibrary.com?
It's available on Amazon. The title is The Dawnbreakers Movie. It contains a screenplay, a long preface, the chronology that I wrote in order to be able to write the screenplay, to know exactly what the story was, and other documents. All of these documents in that particular book were sent to the Universal House of Justice. At the time in the 1980s, and in those days, there wasn't email and attachments and files. You had to copy all this stuff in mail packages. And in fact, more than that was sent to the Universal House of Justice, who wrote back that they were praying for the success of the project and that I should maintain control of the project.
Thank you. So in terms of this, how the Bab met Mullah Hussein at the gate of Shiraz, how is it, did he know Mullah Hussein was coming there, or did he just happen to stumble upon him? Do you know more details about that?
I'm afraid not. Remember, when I talk about developing the chronology of this story, let's not forget that the overall author of this story is God himself, okay? So these events were written by God. And so, maybe it was a miracle that the two encountered in that way at that time.
Thank you. We have one question asking if you're a priest or mullah. I guess I'll go ahead and answer that. We don't have any clergy or priests in the Baha'i faith. So all these, perspectives are shared by individuals who have obviously done a lot of research, but we do not have priests. We have some questions about, like, could your Dawnbreakers movie be released to, like, the Baha'i media or in general?
Well, first, the movie has to be actually made. At this time, back in the 80s, I had a financing, a possible distribution deal with Paramount Pictures for this film, and that didn't quite work out completely. I moved on to other projects, mainly in physics and science. And my daughter last year told me I should put the screenplay and associated documents in a book, which I did, which is now available on Amazon. And then I saw the book and I said, well, gee, sometimes the movie is based upon a novel. Let's write a novel based upon the movie. And the novel contains many pictures and things like that, which might be a better way for people to absorb the story in great detail.
Thank you. And have you thought about making an audiobook?
No, I haven't, but that's an idea which may be of interest to someone with perhaps a better voice than me.
Thank you. And how did you get interested in, studying all this history? Was it just a personal interest of yours, or have you, like, studied other types of history?
Well, one of my best friends when I was at the University of Chicago as a student was a man named a Baha'i named Hishmat Moyad. That's Heshmamet, Moyad. And he was a professor in Oriental Studies at the time. And so I was always interested in the details of the history. And so later on, when I thought about making a movie, and when my dad, who was a movie editor and producer of films and TV shows and things, said, well, Jim, the first thing you need is a script. And so I said, oh, I need a script. Okay. So I quickly discovered that I really didn't know the story. So I had to make the chronology and I worked from there. Now, let's see. I think I forgot the question. Call it a 75-year-old senior moment. Did I really answer the question, or shall we go again?
Yeah, I was just asking how you got interested in studying this history.
Well, I was always fascinated by the history, and my chronology, by the way, at that time was looked at by a number of Baha'i scholars, and so that this was apparently the most detailed effort to make a chronology that had been done up to that time.
Thank you. And what types of sources did you use when researching besides the Dawnbreakers?
Well, when I was working on the chronology, I was a professor at the School of Medicine at the University of Puerto Rico. I had pioneered as a Baha'i there from the US. I made several trips to New York, and I stayed with my brother there who lived there, to spend in the New York Library all day, getting books by Gobineau, Nicholas, the two Frenchmen who wrote about the Baha'is. I had studied French, so I could read these books in French. And other sources, of course, there's the Dawnbreakers by Nabil, which Shoghi Effendi published. And so I did all that research to finally come up with a chronology. And I realized that this was a fantastic story that had to be told.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think we will end it there. So thank you so much, Dr. Keene, for all your research, your hard work that went into even, coming here today and giving us your presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your kind attention. I love you all. God bless.
Thank you. So our speaker next week is Mr. Marco Oliveira, and his topic is the Tablet of Mas'ud, an introduction to the writings of Baha'u'llah. So again, these are every Saturday, noon Eastern time. And I'll put a link again to our contact form if you're not on our mailing list already. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next Saturday. Bye.